Hello and welcome back. I'm your host, Charles Musgrove of the Answers That Count. Thank you for joining us. We have another I'm going to tell you, this is going to be an awesome show. We're going to speak to Dan Murdoch with Harry, and we have a lot of good conversation about the minimum wage, about technology for restaurants. That's going to be just a great topic that Dan is extremely experienced with, and he's going to provide, I would say, a ton of nuggets of knowledge for us. So you want to make sure that you stick around for the show. Hit the subscribe button, please, because you're going to want to be notified when we drop future shows about this topic and other business-related topics. So let's get started with the show. And we want to give a special thanks to Heartland Payment Systems. They are the sponsors of this series that we're doing with the Florida Restaurant Lodging Association. The FRLA is one of our special partners that we're doing this podcast series. So we've got other podcasts that we've already done, and we've got some in the future that we're doing also related to the minimum wage issue as it's increasing to $15 in the state of Florida. And we're seeing that increase across the United States. So Heartland, thank you. This podcast is brought to you by a longtime partner of the Florida Restaurant Lodging Association, Heartland Payment System, who is a trusted payments, payroll, and HR provider of the association. Heartland provides top-in-class solutions to help you grow your business. Please visit frla.org/Heartland to find out more. Thank you, Heartland. We appreciate this. And before we get started, I want to read a disclaimer that related to the FRLA. This information provided here is for educational purposes, and FRLA does not warrant or endorse any particular provider. FRLA is prohibited from providing a specific legal, financial, or accounting advice, and the information represented here is not intended as such. FRLA encourages businesses to consult qualified, competent advisors in these fields to explore their specific situation. All right, Dan, we've got all of the administrative stuff out of the way. You know, you got to cover that. We appreciate Heartland. This is a series that we're doing, and I know you've been in touch with me on previous calls. This is the first time we've had the opportunity to do a podcast, but I want to give a special thanks to Florida Restaurant Lodging Association. They are really putting this series together in partnership with them. We're trying to get the word out to the members of the FRLA and other restaurants across the United States on really consider this. Consider these things that we're going to bring the attention to on how they should manage the change related to minimum wage, because costs are going up. It's a given. We know that minimum wage is going up. Heck, we're seeing the costs go up in other areas of our P&L right now also. So it's a big deal, and people like you can really help the restaurant owner prepare for and manage the changes they need to not let their profits erode. I mean, the last thing you want to see is profits erode off of the P&Ls that those owners are giving back, because once profits start to erode, it could be a short time before they're out of business.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And Charles, thank you so much for having me, and special shout out to the FRLA for hosting all this. I couldn't agree more with anything you just said about them, and as a proud organization of helping restaurants find answers.
Good deal.
Right?
So,
and it's all tremendous.
It is. Dan, you are with Harry, and tell us your role with Harry and what Harry has meant for the industry, because as I've learned more about you and what you've done with Harry, it's just tremendous, and I'm really looking forward to what we're going to bring today on the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a VP of marketing here at Harry. I've been here for 3 years. It's been a tremendous journey helping restaurants of any scale and scope to help drive their business through their people. We're an employee experience platform, very technically a human resource management system that allows you to build, manage, and develop your teams from a single platform. And so that's everything from hiring technology to workforce management technology to learning to training, up and down the entire employee experience. And we're inspired by everything to do with what I'm going to call the renaissance of restaurants in the wake of COVID-19. And we're of the belief that technology is an absolute facilitator and catalyst to making that a reality. And of course, as Charles, you alluded to earlier, it's never been harder to run a restaurant.
Oh, yeah. It's crazy. That's one of the most difficult businesses across the United States or anywhere, is to run a restaurant. I mean, you got so many variables to deal with. And one of the things I love about what Harry does and what's so on point is when you talked about the technology is around the human intervention, the employees. How do you make that interaction the best? How do you make it the most efficient? You need technology to do that, to really maximize the efficiency and the interaction. How the employer interacts with the potential new hire that they're going to have, all the way through the employment lifeline. So thank you so much for bringing that. And in honor of Harry, I wore the Harry blue today. So we're going to see the Harry blue color throughout our podcast. So Dan, Harry did a survey recently, and they surveyed 8,000 restaurant owners. So that was 8,000 restaurants and 185,000 employees across the U.S. So that was a pretty large survey that they did. And a lot of the findings that they had in this survey, people are going to look at it and say, well, yeah, that's what I expect. But it really, I think, validates the focus on people, technology, and the fear of what's going to happen with this $15 per hour minimum wage across the U.S.
Exactly. It's a conversation starter, right? Let's level set on the realities of what wage inflation does to a restaurant business, whether it's one location or 1,000, right? The compounding effect ultimately of an incremental or geometric raise in minimum wage has a trickle down effect to the P&L. And we have to find ways, we have to play gymnastics economically within the business to figure out what levers we're going to pull in order to counteract it. And what we've found, of course, of the history of studying this for the last 3 years, is that there's pretty much two audiences of which you can lean upon in order to try to counteract this wage inflation. And that's either in the context or in the experience of the guest or of that of the employee. And as we found through the results, we're either going to raise menu prices, we're going to cut jobs, we're going to cut hours, we're going to try to do more with less.
Right.
And the reality is, as we've come to find, we've hit a tipping point. We've hit a tipping point with respect to who we are going to alienate, if you will, in the pursuit of trying to maintain margins and profitability.
Yeah, such a balance.
You can't do it. It's tough.
Let's go through some of those. John, let's click through some of those. So 82% of operators are in opposition. Well, that's kind of a no duh. You don't want to have cost increase, right?
Exactly. And the overwhelming majority, of course, are in favor or in the opposition of increasing minimum wage for $15 an hour. I don't think any of us philosophically, right, are in a position to say like we're against somebody making $32,000 a year.
Right.
But it's not about that.
Exactly.
It's about the velocity of which these changes are coming.
Right.
And the expectation that this industry can respond in a way that isn't detrimental to the economics of the business.
Right. So I've got a good friend that's on the podcast often. He's a economics professor at FSU, and we've talked about how government intervention has unintended consequences. So this is another form of government intervention where they're mandating the market pay certain prices. So whether the market says, yeah, that's the right price to pay somebody, the government has intervened and said, you must pay them this. So there's going to be consequences to that.
And there is a societal piece to this as well, right? The march for $15 of minimum wage, that's been an ongoing effort and association and lobbyist group for the last 5 years or so. It has gained all this momentum. And of course, from a philosophical humanitarian perspective, no one is against this. Right. But to your point, it's the rate at which it comes and the ultimate consideration or concessions that are made for businesses that are so intimately involved or leverage this kind of labor and how it factors into the economics, the integrity of the economics of that business. And that is always a missing piece in this equation.
And you're going to hit on this later as we talk about this. But right now, we're seeing labor shortage across the United States. It's not just a Florida thing, but we're seeing this from Miami to Seattle, Washington, where restaurant owners in other industries as well, they can't hire enough people to conduct business. I mean, they're in a pinch, and so they're already increasing wages to attract people and to be a differentiator of their competition across the street.
Yeah, and Charles, you and I were connecting earlier about, an example of, an operator that's giving out bounties for people showing up for interviews, right? And
Yeah,
that's made national news.
right.
And we actually did a study on this as well. Of course, we try to find any opportunity possible to develop research that is helpful and useful to this industry and to leaders to make informed decisions. It's a labor crisis at its whole at
Right,
its core.
right.
And it's a result of course, hospitality having a branding issue at this moment in time as a stable industry of which I can build a career within.
Right.
There is, of course, still considerations around health and safety that people take into consideration. We also found that 30% of hospitality workers are unwilling to get vaccinated at this moment in time.
Mm,
And if that's
interesting.
a consideration or a requirement of employment, that's a problem.
Right.
Moreover, the displacement of that labor into surging industries such as essential retail, convenience, Amazon warehousing, the gig economy, those all have permanently displaced many of the workers that were once employed by the hospitality industry.
Uh,
All of that has compounded itself and resulted in a massive shortage.
yeah, very good point. And we've seen that in folks that we've talked to across the United States, out in California and Seattle. And that's their conclusion as well, is that people during COVID, a lot of the workers in the restaurant industry left the industry for something else, and they're not coming back. So
Precisely.
whether they're at Amazon or whatever is in the gig economy, they've left that restaurant industry. So let's go through a couple others. 89% said an increase of that magnitude would just, I mean, okay, that sure. Listen,
Yeah, it's continuity between that and the first point. We can definitely jump to the next one, which
right,
I believe gets into, legislation that is also, if the increase in minimum wage wasn't enough, let's also pull tip credit
right,
dynamics away from you, which is such a heavy consideration with respect to backing into minimum wage for a lot of full service concepts.
right.
And so, and that, by the way, we've also done research on what is the perspective of employees with respect to the removal of tip credit, and they're not in favor of it either,
Interesting.
because they're of the belief that they will earn more money if given the opportunity for the variability of tips.
Yeah, I love that.
So
I love that
it's
because
crazy.
yeah, that is and we've talked about that before too, where incentives matter. So if you're good, hardworking, customer driven wait staff, if they have the opportunity to earn more money, they want to be in that environment because they know they can deliver, they can get paid more than what somebody says, here's all you're going to get paid is $15 an hour.
Precisely.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
74% believe that eliminating tip credit, okay, yep, it will affect them. Increase menu prices, and we're seeing that. I mean, there's going to be all things on the P&L are going to be affected, including increases in the menu prices.
Yep. And as we were talking about earlier, of course, the supply chain is getting impacted as well. The price of corn has nearly doubled. And the last time that happened, it actually impacted the price of beef in a similar manner. So everything to do with increasing menu prices is, of course, usually or most commonly the most obvious lever to pull
Right.
in the pursuit of counteracting wage inflation. But the question is, Charles, how much elasticity is in that pricing?
Exactly.
We see quick service and fast casual moving away from value now, and we'll see how long that lasts, particularly as reopenings and more choice become readily available in the wake of COVID-19. It's going to be really interesting to see.
Yeah, those a lot of the people we talk to, they're encouraging, and we're talking to people that have already gone through an implementation of the $15 an hour. The people in California and Washington that have already lived through this, they're saying you have to plan, you have to have multiple options when you start managing these changes in your operations. You can't just think that one solution is going to be it and it's going to work and last forever. That you're going to have to be able to monitor the changes, the effect of those changes, and be ready to adjust to other changes. Menu prices is not going to be the only answer. I mean, that's kind of the easy go-to. We're going to increase prices, but you're going to have to do other things as well throughout your operations.
Yeah, and a comprehensive understanding into labor, sales, all of the inputs, right, that factor into the P&L have to be understood not only at a high level, but at a granular one,
Right.
to understand where you can hopefully maybe create a blend
Oh yeah, it
of
is.
strategy.
So the reduce employee hours. So if you're going to reduce employee hours, we're looking at the introduction of additional technology to allow those employees that remain to be more efficient. Or I guess the one of the most dramatic things, if you go from a full service to a quick service or counter service. So, I don't know if there's if people will jump off of that change immediately or if that's a gradual change. But this survey tells us that people do have the intent to reduce employee hours. 69% said that would be a reality.
Yep, that and cutting jobs, right?
Yeah,
That begs
eliminating
the
jobs,
question. There
62%.
you go. The problem with both of those decisions is that you're going to experience turnover as a result.
Right.
And as we were just alluding to earlier in this conversation, the ability to find people right now in the hopes of backfilling those individuals if you need to, because flexibility is required, of course, and scheduling satisfaction is everything
Right.
to these kinds of employees. How are you going to eliminate jobs and hours without a intimate understanding of the impact of what hours to eliminate or what jobs to eliminate? And technology, of course, is a path to better understanding the composition of how labor is performing in contrast with sales, and building patterns and looking at historicals and what have you. But to just make a knee jerk response and just, well, I'm just going to cut jobs, cut hours, and raise menu prices, that is a combination or a formula for no success, both for the service delivery experience and for the experience of your
Yeah, I
employees.
totally agree. And I think that's one of the pushes we're trying to emphasize in every one of these podcasts is to have plans, plan early, and don't just rely on those factors that you said, increase menu prices, reduce hours, eliminate jobs. That's not going to be the right answer, because you're going to need to have a combination of changes that you manage throughout that business. Let's go to the next one, John. Close additional locations. So you have a lower percentage that's looking at closing locations, but when you have those outlier locations that are not as profitable, I think that's going to be reality, that you're going to have some close.
Yeah, and it's been a survival of the fittest dynamic, right, for the last 13 months. Both core to the business, but also I think when we work very closely with enterprise brands that have national footprints, it's been a really challenging time to decide which locations to keep operational and at what capacities, and ultimately for the longer term. And if there's richer opportunities now in the wake of, unfortunately, hundreds of thousands of SMB operators and businesses going out of businesses, there are now optimal scenarios from a real estate perspective to open up locations in more opportunistic areas.
Right.
And so it's an unfortunate cause of this. And hopefully, if you are in a position, as you were mentioning before, Charles, to plan ahead, to think proactively and thoughtfully and intensively around the combination of actions that you can take, you might be able to avoid this dynamic.
Right. John, do we have other slides there? New technology. Let's talk about that. Let's go through the, what else do we have, John, on those slides? Ancillary positions. Okay, click through the next one. Commissary. Okay, so those are other survey results. I think a lot of those are you would expect those results. So let's click that off, John, and go to full screen. Let's talk about the importance. I know we have the work shortage. There's not enough people in the workforce right now to satisfy all the positions. So it really emphasizes that employer-employee interaction from the moment they come into contact with the employer. So what are the technology solutions to make that a better experience?
Yeah, of course, we're in the business of transforming the employee experience through the lens of technology. And to draw the most common analogy or understandable analogy now, everything to do with the way that restaurants responded to COVID-19 was in a way to completely transform digitally the experience of the consumer, right? Everything to do with integrating across delivery, thinking about multi-channel engagement, loyalty, native application management, the ability to have greater control,
Right.
over the experience of the consumer. We are trying to do the same exact thing now in the context of the employee, right? Which is arguably equal to or greater than the relationship that you have with your customers, because your business is translated through your people.
True.
And so, we have to think collectively as an industry to do better by our people because they deserve it.
Right.
Right. And if we believe that guests are an extremely important audience to the integrity of our business, then employees have to undergo the same level of investment and time and energy and technology to improve their experience to drive better business outcomes. And Charles, to your point, it starts from the very beginning of the first interaction. First impressions are everything, right? The first interaction of which a prospective employee has with you and a job posting.
Right.
What does that job posting look like? What is the experience from the point of which they click to apply? How long is it taking for somebody to reach out to them to learn more about their interest in applying for that position? What are the screening questions? What is it then as a next step for them to get an interview? How are they being communicated with between that acceptance of their application to the point of which they have a scheduled interview, whether it's virtual or physical, and everything in between that, right? How are we analyzing all of those interactions in a way that best positions us to optimize, in this case, the candidate experience, to increase our likelihood to retain that individual through the course of that process and hire them successfully? That is just one example of an experience that you need to nail now. It's not a nice to have.
Right.
It is a must have, because the fight for talent is real.
Right.
And the only way that you will successfully get to a point, because you're not going to be able to sit there and wait for the application to come and respond and call and text. It's not realistic. There are 5,000 other things that you got to worry about, and your general manager's got to worry about in a day-to-day basis. So technology has to be the means for which you're building that experience and can augment some of the manual intervention that you'd otherwise be responsible for to make that experience great.
So there's the
not even okay or good.
Yeah, it's got to be great. So the technology is there now so that if you have an applicant respond to a job posting, that they get a response within hours rather than days and
minutes, Charles.
Minutes.
Because we actually just launched a new platform, which is we're terming as Carry. It's called Carry Chat and Apply. And it's a conversational AI chatbot that enables you to queue Carry in a scenario where somebody applies to the job, and Carry can reach out via SMS, Facebook Messenger, a whole host of channels as required or as expressed through the actual application experience by that candidate to begin the initial conversation around getting scheduled for an interview or do further screening in right that moment, right? The problem is, Charles, to your point, I applied to a job through Indeed, and what happens next?
Goes into a black hole.
It goes into a black hole. Right. And so we're in a mission to transform that experience that best positions you as an employer to get that quality candidate in your doors and working.
I think that's a key technology that's available now. And I can't recall a time period that it's been more important to capture quality candidates within minutes of them responding to a job posting.
Yeah. These are the times.
Yeah.
Right. That's also the expectation.
So if that is a key element to technology that's available now, what other key technologies should people be using now or that are available now that'll help them become more efficient, attract better candidates and retain them longer as employees?
Yes. Great question. Let's double click on retention and satisfaction, right? It obviously starts from the point of which they apply the job, and you hopefully get them through that process as efficiently and as quickly as possible, and now they're hired. But guess what? The journey's only begun, right? The challenge has only begun with respect to making that hire successful.
Right.
We term a hire successful from the point of which they stay on the job more than 90 days.
90 days.
Right. More than 90 days. And so what is it that we are doing, right, from a technological perspective to equip you with everything that you would ever need to help drive the satisfaction of that employee? Well, first and foremost, that employee is not having to now bounce between 4 or 5 different technologies to get my onboarding materials and to get onboarded properly with all the other documentation that I need. I'm not needing to jump in and out of all these different techs in order to just show up on the first day prepared and ready to go.
Is
Secondly,
is that technology self-directed so that the employee is driving that conversation and providing that data?
Yeah, both, right? And the continuity between having all of your pre-hire technology with Harry, right, and your post-hire technology with Harry is that it's one click to move them into the other side of the workforce management platform.
Right. Good.
Right. So boom, I've hired you. Now I've onboarded you, right, successfully into what's the technology you're gonna most commonly interact with to come to work, right, successfully and to be on board. Your schedule, right? So now I've got my schedule not only in front of me from a desktop perspective, but I have it on my mobile phone, right? I can access it on a web-based application or a native application, right? And I'm being communicated with on a multi-channel basis, whether it be through text or email or through push notifications or what have you, or through Carrie, right, for that matter, around when am I working and how do I have visibility to that, and who can I speak with and be working with directly to ensure that I am where I need to be on day one. And that is what we're equipping operators with. And we've had tons of success with massive brands and regional players and, of course, local players over the course of our history. But the idea being that, like, once you have all of this consolidated into a single place, you've got your employees in a system of which they're satisfied and engaged. You're now able to draw so much data in informing how do I drive my most efficient labor model through my scheduling platform and through communications and other forms of sentiment gathering, because we also have a time and attendance platform, right, for which people are actually clocking in, and we're asking them, how is your shift, and rated from 1 to 10. Well, why is that happening? If you're not satisfied, like why was your shifts not to your expectations? Like, all these things are built in a way to give you greater amounts of insight, not only to the sentiment and the overall satisfaction of your employee base, but also, how do I ensure that I have this shift properly staffed?
Right. So it's
right, to drive the optimal sales.
So you set the employee up to have the best experience. So they're not jumping from multiple applications or tools. So it's all in one application. So you really streamline their interface with the tools and technology that they should be using. Plus, it equips the business owner, the management, with the best tools to have the position staffed to have the maximum amount of sales.
Yeah, and we're delivering the managers, right, who are ultimately needing to make those decisions proactively, right, whether it be on a weekly, bi-weekly basis, monthly basis, depends on how they're forecasting and what their procedures are, but equipping them with all the information necessary to allow them to make data-driven decisions around staffing.
Right.
To drive as much efficiency as humanly possible through the process of building a schedule, the flexibility to be able to handle shift swaps and changes and other forms of requests that, of course, naturally occur over the course of a week or a day, for that matter, and be able to check the performance of sales and labor intradaily through a native mobile application and make decisions.
Right.
All the while being compliantly managed and monitored right? Off the back of, because we obviously help operators in some of the most litigious parts of our country, whether it be California or be New York City or Chicago and Philadelphia now, from a predictive scheduling perspective. We've thought through every nuance, right? And because we're focused on the use case of a restaurant, both at a, we'll call it a 5-unit level to 1,000-unit level, we've seen everything that we need to go build successfully the technology that'll equip and empower these businesses to gain scope control over their people and not have to worry about the things that often are laborious and administrative,
right,
to general managers on a day-to-day basis,
right.
and focus on driving the business forward.
Right. It takes care of the mundane and allows the decision makers to focus on what's critical to run that business and be successful. What do you see, before we jump off of the employee part of this, the technology tools? Are there other things that you see coming in the future that's going to even make the employee experience better and improve the retention of the high quality employees?
Yeah, I think instant gratification and the expectation around that is going to become imperative to operators. So what I mean by that is, and we were speaking about a little bit earlier, when I apply for a job, I expect somebody or something to reach out to me in minutes, not hours, not days. The same sort of consumer level experience will be expected of that in the scheduling environment, in the learning environment, in every aspect of my interaction with that employee, as well as having a direct understanding of culture, process, procedures, anything and everything, right? And when I'm getting paid and how I'm getting paid, all of those things.
Right.
And the most important aspect to employee retention is scheduling satisfaction,
Really?
aside from managerial satisfaction. So that comes in a close second, right?
Yeah.
But typically they're dissatisfied with their manager because they're not getting the schedule they want.
Interesting. I want to jump to one other point on the employee side. Do you also see the employers enriching the compensation package for the employees to increase retention?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the leading edge of those who have the economic means to do it, right? You look at Chipotle, that's paying for people's education,
right.
Chick-fil-A, and all these other, I define them as people first businesses. That's the mantra that they've taken as a principle, as an operating principle of their business. They put their people first. They invest in the technology. They partner with the right organizations. They're doing the things, and Starbucks, of course, is included in this equation as well. They're doing the things that allow them to have a point of differentiation and competitive advantage to attracting what they determine to be the right type of talent that believe in those kinds of things. And by the way, diversity and inclusion are going to be really important moving forward, right? With everything that we've learned over the last 12 months and everything that's happened from a societal perspective. Like those are all things that visibility is going to matter.
Right.
And how you compare yourself to a Chipotle or to a national, potentially publicly traded brand is different than that of a regional or localized operator, of course.
Right.
But it's about that visibility, and it's about the fact that, if I want to work at a particular restaurant, it's because well, wow, I get my schedule 2 weeks in advance, like clockwork. I know exactly when I'm working. I have a great relationship with my manager. He or she is super communicative with me about how I'm performing. I know I have the flexibility to take time off if I need to, but it's all facilitated through the tech.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, it's definitely
not managed on.
It's definitely a seller's
pages.
market. If you look at the employees as selling their time, then the employers have to cater to that and make it a good experience for them. So I know we touched on the customer experience really was number one priority during COVID, and that the operators changed how they function. They changed their delivery method to meet the demands of what the times required and what the customers needed to keep business coming. So anything you see coming in the future as far as technology changes for the customer experience?
Yeah, technology changes for the customer experience, I think, will continue to set the standard for what the employee experience will then look like, right? Imagine the disconnect of somebody who wants to buy from you as a consumer, and then they go to apply for a job, and it feels like they're in a process that is circa 1996, right? Like it's such a disconnect
Right.
between the continuity of your brand, and it's as equally important to that of the consumer side. I think, we're seeing a lot of M&A activity, of course. We're going to continue to see interesting trends, I think, with respect to how the interaction with consumers and the personalization of how they're being interacted with from an incentivization perspective will be really interesting to see. Right now, all these brands have access to your data as a consumer, direct access, not through a third party like Seamless or through Uber Eats as disproportionate as it was pre-COVID. If you have invested in the technology to have a proprietary application or means of which people can order from you or loyalty, right? You can now incentivize on a personalized basis based off the behaviors of that consumer in a way that you never did before.
Right.
You can now measure, like, somebody hasn't been to the restaurant in 2 weeks, throw them a 10% code.
Yeah.
Right. Or throw them a free item to get them back into the business. That level of intelligence is what is going to ultimately evolve. And then think about that in the context of the employee experience, right? Like the ability to be able to predictively, initiate some form of interaction with an employee based off certain criteria of, like, let's say they show up late for 2 days in a row. That's interesting. That's a behavior that I want to have visibility into. And maybe it's a precursor to something,
Right.
a larger point of dissatisfaction.
Right.
Let me interact with that employee and find out what's going on.
And you may be able to save them from leaving.
Bingo.
Yeah. I love it.
So
That is so interesting. And the what are you seeing from the customer experience? I've talked to other operators about this. During COVID, there was the takeout business really prop businesses up and allowed them to stay in business. So of that takeout business, how much of that have you seen stick as far as a percentage? So we know that the restaurants have opened back up, so their revenues have increased by in-store dining. How much of the takeaway, the carryout, has remained with the restaurants? Is it a high percentage?
I think it's still going to be a high percentage. I think the flexibility of however you want, the confidence around the flexibility of what you interact with the restaurant is now there, right? Like I can go and I can dine in, or I know that if I'm in a rush and I got a family of 5 and I just need to pick up something that's semi-healthy and will work for me and my schedule, I can go do that. Right. And I think it's just confidence. It's consumer confidence around the ease of which I can interact with a brand, and like the incentivization now around buying more frequently.
Right.
Like, oh, I'm going to get rewarded for this behavior, right? Which didn't happen before. Right. So there's all this motivation around purchasing through the digital avenues. Right. As opposed to dining in, although now you're seeing through the power of QR codes, the ability to actually scan your loyalty from when you dine in with some of these full service concepts. So I don't think it will obviously level out.
Right.
It was disproportionate in COVID. It will begin to level out, but it won't be this, I think, dramatic shift necessarily of being like, well, it was 80% delivery, 20% everything else, and now it's flipped. I don't think that's going to happen. Whatsoever. At least that's not what I'm hearing.
Yeah, so interesting, and it's even how we dine out as well. I mean, before you rarely did takeout or delivery. You did all in store. Now even how we do it personally has changed. We're much more apt to do takeout rather than dine in, and probably the frequency has increased as well.
Right, because that was what we're saying. We're thinking on the same wavelength. I'm not in the position to cook dinner. Thinking about the friction of like, all right, we got to get everybody in the car. We got to get to the restaurant, like in order to actually experience that. No. That the ease of now the interaction has created a higher degree of probability of you eating out.
Right.
So therefore, it feels like a smarter option for you at that moment in time.
Right.
And so I think that wallet share is there to stay. The rhetoric right now is around, well, now that the economy in theory is beginning to rebalance, does value chains or do value chains now suffer from the increased competition? And whether or not people are going to choose to eat at Domino's versus maybe a local pizzeria.
Right.
So that's what I'm hearing at this moment in time, but that'll all play out to however it will.
Yeah,
I
that'll
think
play
the
out.
Restaurant Revitalization Fund is going to be a huge enabler to
Yeah.
getting some of those businesses back.
Yeah, it certainly will. But the final topic I want to touch on, and not to leave us on a gloomy note, but we see states, California, Washington, we see New York. They're kind of the predecessor to what happens in the rest of the country. And unfortunately, we've seen the wage increases happen in California and Washington much before the rest of the country. Now Florida's, but what California and Washington and New York, they've already gone through this. I mean, they've already seen the bump up in the wages. What other legislative issues do you see that's happening in other states that the rest of the U.S. may encounter, may have to battle in the near future?
Yeah, the unfortunate nature is that the momentum around legislation that will protect the economic interests of minimum wage workers is only going to increase. So that falls within the categories of federal minimum wage and scheduling protection legislation. It's better termed or more commonly known as Fair Workweek legislation or predictive legislation, predictive scheduling. Even as recently as this week, Chipotle, unfortunately, is facing a potential sum of restitutions and penalties and back pay in the range of $400 million because of miscompliance in Fair Workweek legislation just in New York.
In New York, wow, that's $400 million. So
it's a crazy amount of money.
Yeah.
With respect to how much they are not, how mismanaged potentially that process has been. And we have a very deep understanding of everything to do with Fair Work legislation because we're of the belief that in order to drive an amazing employee experience, you have to be able to accommodate to all the nuances of the localized requirements of Fair Work legislation. That is extremely, extremely challenging to manage in any other manner but a technological one, because there are almost an infinite amount of scenarios of which you become liable
right.
to a violation in predictive scheduling. So the moral of the story, getting back to the point, there is all this momentum and this priority from this administration around any kind of legislation that protects the interests and rights economically of this class of workers. And so it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And the sooner you find yourself in a position to educate yourself on how these things have impacted these markets, how other operators have responded, the better.
Right.
Because it's going to come. And, it's, again, I don't think any of us philosophically are misaligned with the idea of, somebody being able to understand how much they're going to get paid 2 weeks from now so they can figure out how they're going to pay their bills. But how can I, as an operator, successfully forecast a schedule and publish it 2 weeks in advance without having a confident understanding of what's happening within the weather, what's happening in other patterns and variables that ultimately impact the way that I can forecast successfully? And by the way, COVID still being around and a thing.
I mean,
right?
there's so many variables, and the I think the takeaways from our talk today is technology is going to play an ever increasing importance in survivability. How to adapt to changes, how to predict changes, how to remain compliant. If you don't have a good technology platform, it's just scary when you're in these different areas in the United States of how to make sure that you remain legally compliant, because the size lawsuit that is, and granted that's just they're what they're trying to get is 400 million, but that's incredible, and that not only puts a Chipotle at risk, but any independent operator out there as well as it is at risk also. So it's incredible to the risks that are there from a legal standpoint and from just a success standpoint. You have to have the technology in place to attract employees, retain employees, provide the best customer experience, because not only do your employees expect it, your customer expects it as well, and you can't do that off of old technology or no technology.
Exactly right. And we're on a mission to help enable restaurants as best as we possibly can to drive an amazing employee experience while also meeting the operational realities of every local jurisdiction that we possibly can in the context of primarily the post-hire experience, right? Everything to do with scheduling and beyond.
So the other thing is to plan for these changes, right? Don't just don't wait on the changes. Don't just think you're going to increase prices and that's going to take care of it.
Yeah, unfortunately those days are done. And it's time to rethink the way that you're approaching employee interaction and experience and the technology that's enabling it. And I know I keep belaboring the point, but just think about everything that you've gone through as an operator around the guest experience for the last 13 months and apply that same methodology to how you're going to think about the employee experience, and the rest should take care of itself.
That's a good point to end on. Dan, thank you so much. This has been such a good session that we've had. I really appreciate your participation, how you've helped the Florida Restaurant Lodging Association, how you've brought meaningful information to all the restaurant owners and operators across the United States and Florida. So thank you, Dan. I look forward to talking to you in the future and you helping us out as we navigate these changes that we should be making. Thank you so much. I am your host, Charles Musgrove. Thank you so much for joining us on Answers That Count. Have a great day.